The demon doll. Jason sat near the fireplace, the weak flames dancing in the darkness of the old wooden house. The crackling fire mingled with the wind whistling through the window cracks, making the atmosphere even colder. Mrs. Margaret, an elderly woman with silver hair and a face lined with deep wrinkles, sat opposite him. The dim light from the fire cast strange shadows on her aged face. She looked at Jason with a thoughtful gaze. "Jason, tonight I have a story. Unlike any story you've ever heard. But before I begin, I want you to remember that. Once you know, you can never forget it." Jason frowned slightly, feeling a tension spreading through his body. "What's the story, Grandma?" Mrs. Margaret took a long breath, her eyes seeming to pierce through the darkness. "It's a story about a doll. A doll that is anything but ordinary." "The story begins many years ago," Mrs. Margaret said, her eyes fixed on the flames. "There was a girl named Eliza. Her family lived in an ancient house in the suburbs. On her 8th birthday, Eliza's grandmother gave her a special gift. A doll with golden hair and blue eyes like the sky." Jason was silent, feeling his breath becoming heavier. "So her grandmother gave her that doll?" "That's right," Mrs. Margaret replied, her voice growing solemn. "But there was one thing that no one knew. That doll had once belonged to another girl. And before it was given to Eliza, it had witnessed many terrible things. Eliza quickly fell in love with the doll, naming it Anna. But soon after, strange things began to happen. Eliza reported that at night, she heard whispers, giggling coming from where the doll lay." Mrs. Margaret paused for a moment, as if to let the story sink into Jason's mind. Eliza's grandmother only thought it was the girl's imagination. But soon strange things began to happen in the house. Lights would flicker out of nowhere, furniture would shift without explanation, and strange noises emanated from the walls. Jason leaned in, trying not to let fear take hold. "So, what did they do?" At first, Eliza's parents thought it was just coincidence. But then, Eliza began to have terrifying nightmares. She recounted that in her dreams, Anna would pull her into a dark room, where horrifying images constantly appeared. Each time she woke up, she found Anna sitting there, those blue eyes seeming to look right through her. On the first night, she saw the doll Anna lead her into the doll world. As the moonlight flooded through her bedroom window, she inadvertently caught sight of a small figure moving. It was Anna, the doll with shining golden hair and emerald green eyes, seemingly waiting for her. "Follow me," Anna whispered, a mysterious smile spreading across her face. Eliza felt an irresistible pull and decided to comply. Anna led her to a tiny hole in the corner of the wall, where a glimmer of light shone from within. Without a moment's hesitation, Eliza crawled through the small hole, and instantly she felt a lightness as if she were flying. As she emerged, everything around her unfolded like a vibrant painting. Eliza realized she was in a magical world, filled with many dolls like Anna, all towering like real humans. In the shimmering light, she saw couples of dolls dancing in a splendid ball. Soft music floated from an orchestra led by other dolls. The grand castle in the hall shone like a gem in the dark night, with towering columns and expansive stairs leading up to a mysterious ambiance. Among the crowd, a beautiful doll with long hair and a lavish dress sat on the stage, skillfully playing the piano. The soaring notes filled the space, making Eliza feel as if she were lost in a wondrous dream. She couldn't believe her eyes as she took in everything. Dolls in sparkling outfits, graceful dancing, and the twinkling lights from grand chandeliers. "This is our world," Anna whispered in Eliza's ear, her eyes brimming with pride. "Come join us, Eliza." Eliza could not resist the allure of the ball. She stepped into the grand hall, where everyone was dancing in a magical waltz. Doll couples held hands, spinning and gliding through the bright lights, creating an atmosphere brimming with life. "Dance with me?" A tall doll in a dapper suit approached Eliza, smiling and extending his hand. Eliza couldn't hesitate. The charm of this world made her feel like she belonged. As she danced, a sense of freedom and happiness spread throughout her body. Each step felt like taking her on a new adventure. The dolls around her laughed and played, creating a warm and joyful atmosphere together. "This is a night to remember," Anna said, looking at Eliza with eyes full of joy. "Anything can happen here. Enjoy it." Eliza felt the power of the music, and she immersed herself in the dance, forgetting all the worries of real life. She closed her eyes, letting the gentle melodies carry her away to unexplored lands. As the ball continued, Eliza suddenly realized that something was wrong. The dolls around her began to appear overly lifelike, as if they had their own emotions and thoughts. A feeling of unease washed over her. "Anna, are these dolls? Souls?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling. "Are they trapped here?" Anna looked at Eliza seriously. "Yes, they are souls trapped in the form of dolls. This world is where they find joy, but it is also where they cannot escape." "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, the dolls turned to look at her with fierce eyes. Their mouths began to stretch wider than their faces, with jagged teeth like fangs. Their features became grotesque. At that moment, Eliza could no longer stay calm. She screamed and ran frantically toward the exit. She dashed through the lavish hallways of the castle, where vibrant paintings hung on the walls. But the paintings were no longer portraits like when she entered. Now, they depicted horrifying images. The faces in the paintings seemed to reach out, trying to bite her. Panic-stricken, she ran, but the hallway felt endless. The sound of eerie laughter echoed behind her. Finally, she reached the door through which she had entered. She lunged at it, but horrifyingly, the tunnel was now damp and dark. She continued to wade through the water. Giant rats and enormous cockroaches made her scream in despair. She tried to push forward in the darkness of the tunnel until the laughter of the dolls faded away. She sat down on a rock in the tunnel, gasping for breath. Gathering her strength, she thought she had escaped the dolls. But suddenly, from the murky water, doll heads began to surface. They looked at her with angry eyes, their mouths wide open, spewing filthy sewage water. They hovered, spinning around in the dark water. Eliza felt faint. When she woke up, she still saw the doll Anna sitting there, looking at her with the same innocent gaze as always. In a fit of anger, she kicked the doll off the bed and yelled, "You betrayed me, you hateful doll." She quickly ran downstairs and told her parents everything. "We have to throw it away," her mother said. "I've also felt something strange happening since that doll arrived. Objects have been moving. Everything is out of place." Eliza took a deep breath and nodded. "We need to get it out of our house." Her father went upstairs to throw the doll away. But strangely, it had disappeared. That night, as Eliza prepared to go to sleep, she screamed loudly as soon as she turned off the light. She backed into the corner of the bed. Her parents rushed upstairs and opened the door. "What's wrong, dear?" They found Eliza pointing at the corner of the wardrobe. "The doll! It's looking at me with an angry glare," she cried, pointing at the closet. Immediately, her father took the doll and threw it out into the garden. That night, she slept with her parents, and everything returned to normal. In the following nights, Eliza heard strange noises from outside her window. Her heart raced as she stood up and moved closer to the window. She gently pulled back the curtain, and a wave of fear surged within her when she saw Anna standing there, her ocean blue eyes shining brightly in the darkness. "Eliza, Eliza." Anna's voice echoed, gentle as a whisper but also enchanting. Eliza could not resist. It grabbed her hand and pulled her away. She screamed in desperation, but could not escape Anna's grip. The doll dragged her into the heart of a vast forest. Towering trees like strong pillars blocked out the moonlight. The atmosphere was cold and silent, with only the sound of the wind rustling and leaves crunching underfoot. "We have arrived," Anna said, the smile on her doll face unwavering. She scolded Eliza for abandoning her. Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine. She spun around among the giant trees, begging the doll to let her go. But Anna only laughed louder and vanished, leaving Eliza alone. The tree canopy was so thick that no light penetrated. She felt trapped in a maze with no escape. "Mom, Dad," she cried out, but all that echoed back was the sound of the mountains. She ran through narrow paths between the enormous trunks, feeling panic rise. Each step seemed to pull her deeper into the darkness. Her cries blended into the stillness. Eliza sobbed in despair until she could remember nothing more. When she woke up the next day, she told her mother about her experience. This time, her father decided to throw the doll far away from the house. Eliza's fear grew, Mrs. Margaret continued, her eyes deep in thought. The girl began to fear sleeping, afraid that the doll would return to find her, just as her fears predicted. One night, while she was in a deep sleep, she saw Anna sitting there. Beside her bed, it whispered, "Eliza, Eliza." It laughed maniacally, "Eliza." No longer able to stay awake, she fainted. The next day, her body was weak and frail. Her parents, very worried, took her to get treatment. But in the end, she did not survive. The girl's passing left her parents heartbroken, and they moved away from that house. People said Eliza had been taken by the cursed doll. Jason suddenly tossed the wooden doll he always carried into the fire. Perhaps it was because he was too absorbed in the story. Or perhaps he feared that one day his wooden doll would betray him, just like Anna had betrayed Eliza. Mrs. Margaret shook her head. "Perhaps the story has frightened you." Jason felt a chill envelop him. However, out of curiosity, he still wanted to know. "Grandma, please continue. That house, is it still there?" Mrs. Margaret looked at Jason with a warning gaze. "It's still there, dear. But you shouldn't go there, Jason. Some things should not be disturbed." Jason went to the abandoned house that Mrs. Margaret had mentioned. Along with a few friends, they ventured deep in the forest behind the village, where the old house stood alone. The house appeared before them, dilapidated and ghostly. The old wooden door creaked as Jason pushed it open. The air inside was much colder, and darkness enveloped everything. The group carried flashlights, exploring every hidden corner of the house. But what caught Jason's attention the most was the bedroom, where Mrs. Margaret said Eliza used to live. As he stepped into the room, Jason sensed something unusual. On the old, dusty, and decaying bed, the doll Anna was still sitting there. Its blue eyes seemed to watch them, and a faint smile appeared on its porcelain face. One of Jason's friends trembled and asked, "Should we touch it?" Jason stepped closer, his hand shaking as he reached out to touch the doll. But, just as his finger made contact, a loud scream echoed from outside, and the whole house seemed to tremble. The lights went out, engulfing them in darkness. For a moment, Jason felt a rush of cold air sweep through his body, and in the darkness, he heard a giggle that resonated, exactly as Mrs. Margaret had recounted. Jason felt his palm freezing as he touched the doll, as if it had drained all his life force. The darkness filled the room, and the frantic breathing of his friends filled the small space. The eerie giggling echoed, no longer just in imagination. "Jason, this isn't right," one of the group whispered, his voice trembling. Jason knew that. but curiosity and fear kept him transfixed on the doll Anna. Those blue eyes, although not glowing, were disturbingly present in the dark, as if they possessed a soul of their own. "We have to go," another person shouted, pulling Jason out of his stupor. Jason took a step back, his heart racing. Just as he withdrew his hand from the doll, the window behind them burst open, cold wind blowing in, sweeping through the room like a whirlwind. Objects in the room swayed and shook, and then a painting hanging on the wall fell with a loud crash. Suddenly, everything stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence, with only the sound of the howling wind outside the window and the intermittent breaths of the group. But in that moment of silence, another sound began to emerge. The tiny footsteps of a child echoed from the direction of the bed. Jason glanced over. The doll had vanished from its spot. The group was in a panic. "Run!" one person yelled, and without waiting, he dashed out of the room. Jason followed, his heart pounding in his chest. But as they ran into the hallway, something more horrifying awaited them. Standing at the end of the corridor, shrouded in darkness, was a small shadow, a child with glowing blue eyes. Jason gasped. It was the doll. But now it was no longer an inanimate object. It had transformed into a living entity, with light, terrifying footsteps advancing towards them. "Don't look into its eyes," Jason shouted, trying to pull his friends towards the front door. But it wasn't that simple. The doll had grabbed Jason's hand. He felt himself losing control. He screamed for his grandmother to save him. The boy stuttered. His grandmother rushed to wake him. He woke up, realizing it had only been a dream. Grandma Margaret whispered, "For a long time, did I know about that doll but not tell you?" Grandma Margaret sighed. "Anna is not just an ordinary doll. It is a haunted object. The soul within it belongs to a child who died tragically." Jason snuggled closer to her. He felt safe with her beside him, and he drifted back to sleep in her warmth. After the destruction of Eliza's family, the story of the doll in that house continued to spread throughout the region. The doll Anna, once a symbol of innocence and friendship, was now just a haunting image in the minds of children, a fragment of shattered dreams. Anna lay lonely at the base of a tree by the roadside. Her tangled golden hair and blue ocean-like eyes still shimmered with a mystical beauty. But now, it was no longer a symbol of allure. Instead, Anna was a forgotten toy, carrying the sorrow and guilt from a world it had devastated. Time passed, and one afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, another girl happened to walk by. She stopped, her eyes brimming with curiosity, and saw Anna lying among the dry leaves. "What a beautiful doll!" the girl exclaimed, bending down to pick Anna up. She didn't realize that beneath the beautiful exterior lay a hidden soul harboring terrifying secrets. Anna, feeling the warmth and love from the girl, smiled gently. A new bond had formed, and its story would begin anew. But this time, would it bring goodness or merely a dark cycle? As the girl walked away from the tree, sunlight poured through the leaves, and Anna once again stepped into a new journey. A journey filled with mystery and uncertainty, where wonders and fears would intertwine. The story was not over. It had only just begun.